really only have three questions for you.
Okay.
The first question is, tell me who you are,
Mm-hmm.
where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the culture you were raised on. Tell me about the traditions that you practice.
Okay, cool. I'm Ambiya Smith, raised right here in Lamert Park, born and raised. I've lived in the same house for 20 years, and 21, I guess. And yeah, just South Central, born and raised. I kind of got introduced to more of like the black culture through my parents, who were studying African studies and West African religion as well. And that's kind of what was the basis of my cultural understanding and my philosophical and spiritual understanding as well. And from there on, I just kind of got bits and pieces from Lamert. Well, my parents basically started off with learning about West African culture a little bit before I was born, about maybe 5 years, and they started learning about the Yoruba culture in particular, from basically different parts of West Africa like Nigeria and Ghana and things like that. And since most slaves from the diaspora came from that area, they felt that they could understand the connection between some of their own identity and culture here, as well as taking it back to those African roots. And so for me, first off, my middle name is Oshun, which is one of the deities in the West African religion, the Yoruba religion, and that deity is the deity of fertility and birth. And my mother was having birth complications during my conception, so I was just like brought into this world, so to speak, by the influence of that energy. So that, first of all, has always been in my mindset and in how I see myself and how I appreciate life in that sense. I'm really grateful for that connection. Also, that connection with the motherland in that way always made me really proud to be black, really proud to have my natural hair, and be connected to the different traditions such as naming ceremonies and just things like libation, giving thanks for the ancestors and all those things. And I just had a strong sense of who I was and where I came from. Even though, of course, in middle school, adolescent, teen years, there was doubt pushed into my mind a little easier by kind of being at schools with less black people and things like that, but it never really made me stray too far away from being proud to be black and being proud to be from the African diaspora. The naming ceremony is basically a ceremony where the newborn child is brought to the elders in the community and the priests of the Yoruba religion, and one of the priests is basically like my grandfather now, who's the one who facilitated the naming ceremony. And basically you're given your name, or your name is kind of solidified for you, as well as the priest does different things that allows him to understand parts of your destiny through just a few different rituals. There also are different elements passed around, and it's touched on the baby's head, as well as everyone else in the circle touches it or tastes it or something. And it's to kind of make sure that all elements of your life are considered and balanced in the way that so that as you go through life, you can always have a balance between those things. And libation is basically where you have some, well, there are different types of libations, but a very common one in the West African Yoruba religion is where you take a cup of water, which is basically like concretized, like holy water in a way, and you use maybe a branch with leaves on it, or a horsetail or something that signifies coming from the earth. You use that water and you drop it onto the floor, and you kind of make the space clean and clear, and you help everyone who has come to that space release the baggage that they've come with, and so that for whatever you're going to do there, that everyone can be clean and everyone can be clear and in the moment, in the right state of mind while you're doing whatever activity you're going to do. And there's a little something said while you're doing that in the Yoruba language, and it mainly consists of like, may we have a cool head, may we have a cool heart, may our ancestors be here with us, may and sometimes you say the name of the ancestors and things like that. It's kind of just like almost like when you go into the church and you dip your hand in holy water, so you just kind of cleanse yourself for whatever activity you're going to do around the people you're with.
Did you and your family do this often?
We did it mainly on days like Kwanzaa, and sometimes we would do it just at random to keep our house itself clear, and to keep like, maybe if we were having like a heavy day or a heavy month or something, we'd kind of do it to keep ourselves centered around like the family values and what really matters. I've also done it here with that same priest who did my naming ceremonies, like a grandfather to me, during like the African Mass Festival that happens here annually for the it's called the African Ancestors Mass Festival. So in the beginning of that priest does the libation for before the procession starts, and so I've done it more times than I can remember, of course, but it's not really like a daily thing, but more in certain events where the community or the family is gathered for a particular reason. Well, my dad's side is from the South, Alabama, Mississippi, places over there, and my grandmother came here at 6 years old, came to Los Angeles at 6 years old, and my grandfather also came here at a very young age and met here in LA. So my dad and all of his siblings grew up right here in Leimert Park, South Central area as well, and my dad traveled around a lot, especially to like Europe, and lived there for many years, but he always knew that he wanted to raise his kids here in South Central as well, so we could keep connected to the Black community and the culture. My mom, on the other hand, is from Costa Rica in Central America, and her grandparents migrated from Jamaica to Costa Rica. So my mom and her parents are Afro-Latinos, and basically they spoke Spanish, but but my mom's grandparents didn't speak much Spanish because they're from Jamaica and the language there is English. So they kind of spoke like a little like broken English Spanish. So when my mom came here, she started learning Spanish, and her parents also worked here in the States, so they would kind of have some exposure of Black culture back home, like her dad would always bring home records of like James Brown and things like that. So they kind of got some of the culture back when they were in Costa Rica. And but when they came here is when they started learning English and identify with what it meant to be black, because over there they didn't really understand their connection to the diaspora, especially since they had left Jamaica, and there weren't many black people in the capital city that they grew up in. They understood being black, but it was kind of like, since they spoke Spanish when they came here, people were like, oh, you're Latino, you're not black, or something like that. Like, black Americans kind of didn't understand and would invalidate their blackness in a way. But my mom started doing more African studies, more just kind of studies of African spirituality and culture, which affirmed her own identity and her own blackness. And so my parents actually met through learning about African spirituality through a friend who was like, oh yeah, like you guys are both talking about the same things. So that's kind of how they got together.
The culture you were being raised into, when you started to rebel from that culture, or when you started to question it, and then when you finally accepted it.
Okay. So growing up, it was just kind of like, it was, you know, as a kid, I knew I was black, but there were some things, even I was still confused because my mom was from Latin America, and so, you know, I didn't know many other Afro-Latino kids growing up, so I was just kind of like, okay, like I know I'm black, but like I know I'm not just like African American as well. And then being that I'm not like super dark, a lot of other black kids would be like, are you mixed with something? Like, you must have something else in you because you're not dark or whatever. And I'd just be like, well, my mom's from Costa Rica, so I guess. But so for a while, I was kind of confused. Like, am I mixed? Am I like, what am I in a way? Like, what does the Afro-Latino part, how does it change my own black experience from just not being African American? And so that confusion mainly took place in maybe like 5th to 7th grade. And even this Asian kid in my class, we got into a little argument, and he was like, that's why your mom was a slave. And I was like, my mom's ancestors didn't even come from slaves. They came from Costa Rica. They came from Jamaica. And then I told my mom that, and she was like, well, technically, like, those black people were taken from Africa too. So I was like, that's when it finally clicked in my head, like the diaspora and how spread out the diaspora actually is. And that's when I was like, okay, I can finally understand, like, I'm black, but just because my mom is not from like America doesn't make her or any other black people less black, you know? So that's when I finally like clicked in my head. And from there, I went to high school and started joining all of these like social justice clubs, like BSU, and like clubs that got me involved in the community and like black struggles. And then I was finally able to really settle in and feel like I could represent who I was, even though I wasn't solely African American. Like, those struggles are put on all of us from the diaspora, and I finally felt that I could represent that while being in those organizations and, you know, fight for that, you know.
But because of the relationships that they have and the loyalty they have and the pride that they have and the respect they have everything.
Yeah.
And so that helped me understand myself better and it gave me kind of the inner strength to push through all of the questions until I was more confident in my beliefs.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get you. I would say for me, when my identity was questioned, I felt like I, well, in times where it was questioned to the point where like people were trying to like put me in a box of what blackness was, I feel like what helped me get through it is knowing and experiencing from living here in Lamert the plethora of black people that exist. And just even from my two-parent home of like people of African descent from totally different cultures, to living in Lamert with seeing people who had all types of backgrounds, all types of careers, all types of interests. You can find all types of black people. You go up the hill, you find all the black doctors and lawyers right here in Windsor Hills, but at the same time, Compton is next door, so there's the gang activity, there's like the black intellectuals, the black business people. So just being able to always see my blackness as dynamic and something that can't be stifled really helped me get through it, and made me kind of like, I feel like mentally it helped not be like, just get caught up in like a loop of like depression about who I'm supposed to be, like I didn't worry about it too much because I always already felt different, especially like even when I was around other black people from the community. I almost felt as different as I did when I was around a bunch of non-black people, because I felt at that time like my experience already is so different, like the things I'm being exposed to is so different, like it was always hard to like fit in with the people around me. So I just kind of had to like accept that I had a much different upbringing than everyone around me, and that it made me happy to be where I was from, even if it made other people nervous. I was still like, wow, I'm getting like all these benefits, like I get to like, I'm in like all these different types of like art classes, and like have all these different type of like elders and stuff in my life. So since I personally never felt like lacking of like positive influences, then it made it easier to not want to fit into the box people were trying to put me in, just because they themselves were in a box. Well, I feel like, again, growing up here, and every Sunday, I don't know if I told you this, but every Sunday there's a drum circle in Lamert Park, where people are playing West African drums, and I live 2 blocks away, so I can even hear it from my house when I go outside and things like that. So I feel like consciously, like when I'm here, but also subconsciously when I'm not like physically here, like when I'm just at home, like that West African drumming connection has itself like the rhythm of it has kind of like implemented a type of rhythm in my life where I rarely ever feel like I'm straying too far from who I am. I've always felt like there's a type of like rhythm and like connectedness back to the original beat of my life path and destiny that I can always connect back to when I need to, and I rarely stray too far from. So that music itself, and like particularly the West African drumming, has always played a big role in me feeling like I'm never too far from home. And from there, I also played the violin from when I was like 5. So music in that way, like playing classical violin, like specifically being like a young black girl who plays classical violin was like rare, and that that musical influence again informed like my individuality and my constant tendency and opportunities to break out of the box of what it means to be a young black girl from South Central. So that really helped me like accept that I was different and that it was okay to be different, and all the wonderful benefits like being able to play at around the city, just from being in the different violin groups. And then I've also always like written, and it's just been like a really valuable way to express myself, and especially like my frustrations. And so from the time I was like 5 or 6, I just would keep random little diaries and just be like, it started off with like, oh my god, my sister made me so mad, like random stuff like that, to like poetry and prose, and I was just always writing, and it was always an outlet. So from there it just kind of grew to like, okay, writing, like mixing with the acting, mixing with the poetry, in the theater program that I was already with, and being exposed to a lot of African American poetry through that theater class just eventually made me start writing my own, and then once I got into high school and started learning more about the black struggle and things going on, then I started writing political poetry, and like that kind of just recently turned into like, okay, I'm like perform at open mics, and then people were like, wow, like this is good, like we like your perspective, we like your flow, like, and then people just were like, perform here, perform there, and like that's just kind of how I started my own musical journey, because I always had so much background and so much exposure to black artists expressing themselves that it was just kind of natural for me to feel like really comfortable on the stage already, and really comfortable like interpreting and creatively expressing like my own experience. And then painting, as we walk around here, you're gonna see like so much art already, and obviously like I just live in LA, so there's just like murals everywhere, and like graffiti, which is super artistic. So I've always felt like I'm just living in this like really colorful world, like that is constantly like with visual art in particular. I've always felt like people in LA, like, we're not too afraid to show who we are, too afraid to speak our truths or express our truths. And especially here in the Mert, like, we're not afraid to remind the community where we come from and who we are, and we keep that consciousness within our own minds, which helps reflect onto the minds of the younger generations as well. So the art here has definitely been like a staple reminder for me of how, just we're not afraid to express ourselves, and we're not gonna like try to hide it either. And even if it's like illegal, like graffiti, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're still gonna find a way to show you who we are in some way.
Yeah. How would you want to be portrayed in a portrait?
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
How would I want to be portrayed in a portrait? I guess like a main thing is like, I don't know, this is like so vague, but like individuality, and like it's this weird double-edged sword that I don't know exactly how to explain one, without sounding like full of myself, but two, without sounding like extra. But like on the street, like since I can remember, like a lot of people have just said like you're beautiful, you're pretty, like from like women, men, elders, like other people my age, like I've just always gotten like that my outer appearance is like, I don't know, people like it or whatever. So it's like, even when I'm looking bummy, I get mad sometimes. I'm like, I really came out here looking bummy, like you're lying to me. But like it's so weird sometimes knowing that like a lot of people like the way I look and my personality, even though a lot of the times I feel like it's hard for me to relate to people, and I feel like weird and just like so like individual, like such an individualistic person. Like, so I feel like some type of like way that a balance between that could be like reflected, like, because I don't feel like I'm beautiful or like pretty like in a basic way, just like a model way or something like that, but just I feel like my inner beauty and my inner individuality is reflected through my outer beauty, and that's more like what catch people's eye than like how I physically look necessarily. So maybe something that could reflect like how inner light from being an individual and like from being like weird kind of is reflected through outer beauty. Yeah. More like how a lot of my ideas and like upbringing are really foreign to people. Like, so there I do want like elements that are really like not random, but just like things that are just like unique, but it's like a uniqueness that people still find beautiful or attractive, you know? So I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's like maybe like a good comparison I can make is like the punk scene versus like Afrocentric. So with the punk scene, they're like being individualistic, but a lot of times often make people kind of like scared of them. Like, yeah, you're being individualistic, but like everybody's like scared of how you look. But on the other hand, with maybe like someone who dresses like really Afrocentric, like they don't buy any clothes from like the store or something, like they definitely stand out and look different, but it's in a way where people are like, oh, like that's an interesting thing you have on, or like they don't feel like attacked by someone else's individuality in that type of dress. Well, in like the punk dress, they're like thrown off and like don't want to associate with that. So I feel like for me it's like more like the Afrocentric type, where like it's still different, it's still something you've never seen before or never experienced before, it still seems foreign, but it doesn't make you like defensive or on like put you on guard. It's you're still like attracted to it in a way.